Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. We are trying to create 1 million leaders here at Maker's Bar today. I'm with one of them. Her name is Jill. She's the CEO and founder at Lunum. Jill, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Troy. It's good to be here.
Of course, of course. It's nice to talk with you again. I'm really excited to learn more about your company, learn more about you. And the way that I like to start these conversations is, what is your story? And that can start from childhood, school, wherever you want to begin your story. Let's dive into it.
Wow, that's a wide open net. So I think we'll pick up my story maybe in 2020, 21. And I guess a little bit of context. Prior to that, I spent what I'd call almost an entire career in manufacturing, mostly in a business development leadership function, supporting consumer packaged goods companies or automotive companies or their suppliers with equipment or raw materials. And my story shifted dramatically in 21 when I decided to take a complete pivot. And I guess you could call it a moment where I felt called to something different and higher than where I'd been. Uh, I decided to move from the factory floor into data around people and what is the impact that we're having in our workforce and our communities when we're paying wages, when we're hiring, when we're looking at our people practices. So that was really the birth of Lunum. It was, of course, not as much of a straight line as I make it out to be. Like at every single entrepreneurial journey, there were sort of fits and starts, and it really began in June of 21 when I left the role I was in and did not have a plan, and I just literally started asking questions and doing, I guess, what you'd call like guerrilla marketing out with people I knew in my career, just saying like, how are we at a point in the world where we've put hundreds of billions of dollars on the table for people and social justice and this theme of employees are our most valuable assets, but ultimately accounting is not fit for purpose these days because we don't measure people as assets. And the resounding answer I got from people when I asked them how they were going to deploy this money that they were publicly uh, saying they were going to use to drive change in the social fabric in the U.S. and beyond, the overarching answer was, "I got a plan to have a plan," and I think that to me was the signal from the universe that I needed to start something that gave them a way to get on the journey to change.
No, that's very cool. And you have a very unique business model at Lunum, like purpose-driven accounting. That's not something that's very intuitive. So could you dive into more about what you're doing at Lunum? What is purpose-driven accounting?
Yeah, so I like purpose driven. We call it impact accounting, but I like
Impact
purpose
accounting.
driven. I actually love purpose driven accounting. That's You might see that in some marketing materials coming up. So impact accounting. If you think of it, if we step back in history, in 1929 in the U.S., the stock market crashed, right? And by and large, one of the factors that contributed to that was people who were investors didn't understand profit and loss in a consistent, comparable, and accurate way. Uh, Fast forward 50 years later, we also started looking at risk and fiduciary responsibility in accounting practices. And as the world has evolved through we'll use the ESG or sustainability term, and these things are factors we're looking at. The big question from the investment community is, how do I consistently and comparably and accurately look at companies to invest in them uh, when there is not consistent, accurate, and comparable data within these organizations? So, impact accounting was born originally to be the solution so that investors had really a triple helix of risk, return, and impact when they were making decisions. Uh, One of the big problems with that is it had not flown into corporations, or how do you make that come to life uh, in a consistent, accurate, and comparable way? So, uh, some years ago, in the last 7, 8 years, Harvard started doing some work on what they called impact weighted accounts initiative. That work was well received by the investment community and really helped to create what we're all looking for, which is that consistent, instead of, company A is reporting it this way and company B is reporting it this way, and everyone says they're the best, but no one has any context or benchmarking or comparisons. Uh, and I actually, as I mentioned, my story early on was not too far off in my thinking from where Harvard was at. But I also knew Jill Miller wasn't going to develop what was going to be an internationally accepted practice for changing and reshaping accounting practices. And when I actually stumbled on the Harvard team sort of randomly and picked up the phone and uh, started talking with Professor Ethan Round, who's in the business school. And I said, hey, do you think we could use this inside corporations? And how do we use it across value chains? And how do we start to build this platform of understanding impact in the decisions we make? And he was like, yeah, this is what we want it to be used in an entrepreneurial fashion. So we started working on building out a supply chain model where suppliers can report in on their impact in areas of wage quality, representation, well-being, uh, uh, opportunity pipelining, and then also job creation and the economic changes in jobs and social safety nets. So was where it all began, and then what we have found with it is it's seemingly becoming a way for companies to look differently at their human capital practices. So there was this initial, how do we drive change and compliance? And there are some European regulations, the CSRD and CS Triple D coming up, that look at impact a lot deeper than previous compliance has required. And that's continuing to roll out. And the one asterisk I always say is, like, I don't think American companies or Canadian companies actually understand how many of how many of those companies will be required to report into Europe in the coming years. So this idea of impact is uh, coming to the forefront of how we look at our decisions, right? And sorry, I can pause there. I know that was a lot, but one of the things I talk about and that kind of keeps me awake at night is how we use the word impact, right? Different people use it differently, but we tend to see it as like, impact is all the good I'm doing as a business or a nonprofit. It's all the good. And in fact, what we see being reported out there, and this is where one of my hypotheses came from around what we needed differently and like deeper KPIs and deeper accounting of our decisions, was most people report or call impact. Number one, it's almost always positive when you report it to the marketplace. And number two, it's almost always an outcome that's reported and not an impact. So we look at things a little differently in impact, I think, than the rest of the
So
community.
what would be the difference between an outcome and an impact?
Yeah. So for us, right, you've got an input and an output, right? You start with, I want to hire 35% more females in my organization. So my inputs are going to be my business resources I'm putting into that. I'm going to change the way I recruit. I'm going to spend a few more dollars on working with local universities to retain women through engineering programs. So it's the resources, the business resources I'm putting in. And then my output might be, we interviewed 150 more candidates, or we saw an increase in women applying for our jobs. the outcome might be over that 12-month period, you might say, okay, we actually did increase women in the workforce by 35%. And to me, that's the outcome. But the question is what actually changed as a result of your business because of the work you did there? And that's the impact.
Mm.
And and then putting a dollar value on that impact for various stakeholders. So it could be as a result of having 35% females, we experienced a 4% increase in productivity. We captured more of the female market share in our consumer base. We reduced absenteeism. Uh, those are the things we're looking at, right? Because if you can reduce absenteeism, you're going to reduce your costs. If you reduce your attrition or your turnover, you're going to reduce costs within the organization. So we're looking at like what is the changed in your business because you made decisions. And I frequently uh, look at this as a journey to wisdom, right? Like it's a it's a journey where today we don't always understand, and I think we're obsessed with data and insights. And I, even as someone who's a data and insights leader, uh, what I'm looking for is how do we take that data and information and start to understand, right? The understanding of impact is knowledge. And for every time you're going to have a positive impact, you have to consider the negative things that happen, right? And not every impact is positive. But then once we start to learn a little bit more and gain the knowledge, then I think we bridge into what we're all truly looking for, which is wisdom. We're looking to understand much further beyond just a KPI dashboard. We're looking to understand how we deliver better experiences for employees, how we create more impact and thriving communities. And I think this gets lost a lot in the KPIs and dashboards uh, of the general business day to day.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool and unique idea. As far as like, so as you were separating out outcome from impact, um, that is something that I've never seen before, and it's cool that you were able to focus in on the positive and negative aspects of that. Are with all the companies that you've worked with, um, what are kind of the results? I want to ask this the right way. The recurring results that you've seen, like what are these new bits of wisdom that you've gained throughout the journey thus
Yeah.
far?
Yeah. So I'd say there are a few. One is I leaned into it just a bit is this idea of turnover or attrition. And the idea that you can use impact data or impact accounting data to intersect into your core business strategy. So, as an example, uh, we've had a couple customers we offer Bright Star verification, which is essentially a program that's like LEED is for environment and buildings. Bright Star is for the people inside those buildings. And so as a part of the Bright Star program, companies are asked to number one look at where they're at in terms uh, of their impact when it comes to human capital and certain factors, um, reflect on that, and then create an action plan for the following year that helps them to intersect that impact data into their core business decision making. And it's been really, really cool to watch this unfold. We're in our second cycle now. And with many companies, what we've seen is, they look at us and they go, oh, we realize we have a wage quality problem, or we realize we have a representation problem, but we have so much of the day to day work to be done, or, we've got 30% turnover, right? Turnover is still insane. And I have some back of the bar napkin guesses for 2025 on what's going to happen there. But I think it's going to continue to be a problem where we have to understand how to retain people. And so we've had companies look at us and go, we've got all these problems to solve. And as we use the data to guide them through the process of peeling back the layers of what is truly going on inside their organization, we've seen fairly rapid results on those. And our focus primarily has been in the supply chain to the consumer packaged goods and quick serve restaurant arena, which I think is amazing. We've also seen uh, we've done some work with the banking, with financial services, and minority deposit institutions. So those are the 150 or so small banks in the U.S. that are Black owned or women owned, or small business owned banks. And what we've seen there, we've continued work with those few of those banks, and it's growing. But what we've seen there is it's created an ability for them to express their impact in a different way than they have previously, as opposed to these macroeconomic strokes of impact, because that's another problem with the current way that people report impact. But
Hmm.
they've been able to really report granular impact, and it has driven additional deposits. They can provide more insight as to potential investors as to how they're creating impact in the community, where they're providing loans. But not only that, right? Wages are a piece of impact. A lot of us like to look at like our community impact as just our philanthropy, but when you look at the expression of wages, that creates significant impact to the communities where we do business. So I think of it as like, you know, banking aside, but generally, if you're paying $16 an hour to one demographic group on one side of the tracks, so to speak, and the average wage isn't enough for them to meet basic needs, or there's massive wage equity issues, how can you actually create community impact? It doesn't matter how many widgets you're donating to the local shelter. If you're not paying people enough, or you're not allowing them to advance through an organization equitably, whether it's through pipeline practices, or training or development, how can you actually create more community impact other than the way that you pay wages and build your community so that people have money to proliferate into the community? So I tend toward looking at things a little bit differently. And I think I will say, I think the way we look at the world is catching on, which is fantastic. But uh, we're starting to see more and more use cases, and there's a growing number of organizations that are really looking to solve the problem of how do we wield people into assets. And just right today, accounting just looks at people like a post-it note or a pen, and people aren't disposable. I think we know that. But we have to figure out how to uncover the intersection of people and uh, profit within the business, and performance and productivity. Uh, so yeah, I'll pause there.
No, it's all very cool. Are there different industries that you see adopting this faster than the others? Like, you mentioned, manufacturing and quick packaged goods, banking. Uh, are there different industries that you're seeing adopting this type of thinking, or that maybe it's more of a problem? Like, or do you like where do you see
Yeah,
the most growth for this
it's
in
a
the next
really
coming
good
years?
question. So I see it sort of across various sectors, but then geographies as well.
Oh, okay.
So complex supply chains, as the world has grown, tend to be global. So I do see a movement into global supply chains uh, as we mature, but I see it as almost a way to monitor human rights and uh, responsibilities and compliance related to wages and people. Sector wise, I think manufacturing is very hot right now, and particularly like packaging processing within that. Uh, we still see that people are experiencing a pretty high turnover, and we use an econometrics model to look at efficiency, and in the manufacturing sector, the efficiency of the wages paid is actually fairly low, right? So there's a lot of room for improvement, and manufacturing also gets the classic like continuous improvement, and that's what this is about, and that's really what Bright Star is grounded in from sort of my days on the factory floor. So manufacturing is one. I think financial services will continue uh, to grow in large part, not just because of uh, their own supply chain or value chain. I see it growing because they are actually lending money from right off their balance sheet. And how do they begin to look at where they're lending money, and is that money actually creating impact? Is it an investment that is returning what it needs to the community? Uh, how do we start to sharpen impact investing? So I see that continuing to grow. I think healthcare is really the next sector. Healthcare, transportation, and logistics. There's a lot of room for opportunity in those areas. Uh, and I think healthcare, I mean, if you want, we can get a little bit into the right what happened last week with the United Healthcare CEO, uh, which I know that we haven't had a judge and jury at this point, but from what we know today, I see that as the ultimate expression of stakeholder pain, right? That is the consumer pain, and never should we solve anything with gun violence. Uh, but it is the ultimate expression of someone who was not heard. And the unfortunate part is, I suspect that we've not seen the end of people lashing out on corporates like that. Uh, and it's a terrible tragedy because at the end of the day, right, those corporations do have a responsibility, but somewhere along the way, consumers are going to continue, and frankly, always in a nonviolent way. I encourage consumers to use their use their voice and their dollar to make decisions differently. If you don't like what Acme Corp is doing, stop giving them your money. And we don't always have the choice, but I think consumer driven industries are going to continue to be hot for us. But I think healthcare is gonna pick up for a number of reasons aside from United Healthcare. But I think the consumer needs to understand too that uh, choices they make impact real people, and every time you're a VP of procurement or chief supply chain officer, the decisions you make have impact on real people's lives, right? So I also look at complex supply chains, and I'm a little biased because this is sort of where I've come from. But I see anything that has a complex supply chain and someone who is responsible for handing out those contracts, I see them as the keeper of the values. If your company says our values are that we appreciate, we want everyone to have a chance, we want equity, as you hand out those contracts, and even as a corporation, as you spend your dollars, you have to live up to your values. And I think we're going to continue to see that grow. Uh, yeah, I think after that, it's transportation and logistics, which also folds into supply chain and value chain. But there is for sure a tightening of how do we start to operate differently as ecosystems, and in the path of it, I very clearly see that, like, we talk a lot about sustainability, and that's environment is at the forefront of that. But sustainability is about financial sustainability and in an organization, and crossing those pre-financial metrics over into finance are really important, but people can't be left behind, right? We have to
Hmm.
like move, we have to include people in the green transition or as a separate adjunct. So I think sustainable supply chain is going to continue to be a growing area for us, as well as people are looking at how to shift their impact. Because ultimately, if you have, say, you have 400 suppliers, and you can help them improve their efficiency with people and their environmental efficiency, it continues to fold up to ultimately the bottom line of the parent company who's buying from all these suppliers. So I definitely think it continues to be an ecosystem play.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Uh, Kind of going from, at least from the supply chain side of things, kind of like the bottom up. If you're helping all the different parts of the supply chain at the end is going to benefit everybody.
Yeah.
I'm curious how, if you've seen any impact on, or if you have any data on consumer impact, because we're talking a lot about employee impact and wages and things of that nature. And then with the United Healthcare CEO, which I will say is a tragedy, and um, the a lot of the response to it, at least for people my age, has driven me up a wall. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's been too much of a positive response. And that's a whole other conversation I'd be happy to have, but I want to focus on you and Lunum for a bit longer at least.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious though, are you seeing any impact, outcomes? I mean, I know that these are two different things, but any impact on consumers versus just the employees and the companies themselves?
You mean in terms of the way consumers are behaving because we're out there
Yes.
doing this? So we haven't yet. So we've moved into, right, as Brightstar matures. My vision is ultimately it ends up on like every single box or bag you buy in the grocery store or get in the drive-through. Uh, we're moving slowly through that, right? It's not an overnight thing. And I should say, I mean, right, long termism is also what we need to move toward, but let's pin that for a second. But we haven't seen this dramatic rise. The day that secretly I want a Super Bowl commercial next year.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Well, not in 25, but in 26, right? And I think if we can start getting uh, that kind of uh, PR going, I think it drives a lot of change because I think we forget. I mean, I think you know, I I ran through the drive-through this morning getting my coffee from one who shall remain nameless. And what I know when I buy that cup of coffee, and I can show it to you. So, right, this is my cup of coffee. It comes with like three pieces of packaging, right? A lid, a cup, and a sleeve, and then probably that silly little waste of plastic that plugs this thing. Um, but what I know is our data shows that 42% of people that make up this industry that are in hourly jobs actually don't make enough to feed their families
Mm.
by our standards, which is the MIT Living Wage and Living Wage Institute standards. Uh, so to me, I think we have to get consumers thinking about that. And we did some research from a consumer perspective. We did a field study. Uh, was it last year? I'm getting it now that we're at the end of the year. I can't remember what year we're in, but we did a field study with consumers on whether or not they really understood uh, who contributes to their products put getting in their hands, uh, and then further, are they willing to pay more, and is this something they want to see? And we got a really high rate from the consumers in the field study that they would pay more for products based on knowing people could, I always call it just simple human flourishing, but knowing that everybody in the value chain or in the supply chain had the chance to flourish. And that's really what we're going for. I'm not saying our data is going to create like enlightenment, but I
I
look at
mean,
it as like,
in a
how do you
sense, it could
start?
though, right? Like in
It
a sense,
could.
yeah, like yeah, what the kind of the end goal is you're turning people into assets, and as this as this new impact accounting or purpose-driven accounting takes place and it becomes a common metric that or these there are impacts that become commonly seen amongst different companies, and it becomes more of a well-known thing. Let's say you get that Super
Right.
Bowl commercial in 2026, and it just becomes more well-known and more common. It's just one of those extra things that we're going to glance at for a second, but we'll understand it in a second what we're looking at, and that can drive a consumer to go one way or the other. It can drive employees to go, people are looking for employment to go one way or another. Um, and in a sense, that is enlightenment, right? Like enlightenment isn't always a
Yeah. Well, this
super
is the
aha
wisdom
type thing.
piece,
Yeah.
right? And I think we have to keep in mind and not get too far away from people that contribute. There's been a lot of, right, a lot of backlash on uh, They'll call it DEI, wokeism. Some people will call it that. To me, that backlash, first of all, let me just say this, right? The word, right? Buddha is awake, right? That is like the translation for how he got his name. Believe me, there is a difference between whatever this woke word is and awake. And if I had to choose between being awake and not being awake, I would 100% choose awake every day and I will fight for it. So I think we have to continue to see that people are part of our ability to flourish as companies. I'm not suggesting at all that anybody shouldn't make a profit. I am a capitalist. I may be a stakeholder capitalist, but I think capitalism can work better. And I think we have to, in some ways, you know, account for account for the fact that this is another area where, like, I'll say accounting is broken. I'm hoping like heck accountants can save humanity. So that's my that is my plan. But another area which I mentioned earlier is long termism and this
Yeah.
idea of everything that we do, we want to see a return in that quarter. And Paul Pullman was is probably the best example. Some people, and I probably would agree, call him the bravest man on earth uh, for moving from quarterly reporting to annual reporting. And he was the CEO of Unilever for 10 years. They performed really well, had a number of excellent initiatives to drive fair trade, increase wages across the value chain, reduce the environmental damage. Uh, it was a like a sea change, and it is unfortunate that that attitude has not been beyond attitude. The actions have not been more widely implemented. And again, when you go at consumers, at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. At least the majority, the
Mhm.
global majority wants human flourishing, safety, security, education, health. We'll call wealth. It depends on how you define wealth. But I think we're all after the same thing. We're just trying to get there in a different way. And for us, the common ground and Lunum actually, it's a made up word that I coined, but it's the intersection of light and anchor, right? It's the I want it to be the light that anchors us on common ground, and to me, that is dollars. We all understand dollars and cents or whatever local
Mhm.
local currency you want to be in, but we can all understand that from the capital market through the board level into the organization to the consumer and all the way down to the person in the grocery store in their cart or the drive-through, right? That is how I see how we affect that change and get toward the enlightenment piece.
Yeah, that makes sense. And um, I can feel myself wanting to talk politically. As you, it's kind of hard not to with this type of topic.
But
Um,
is it? Because if the people, I don't know that it's hard. If to,
well, so like it
I
just
don't think we
with
even have to talk politically because if someone's asking the questions and they're challenging fiduciary responsibility, to me, the problem for the corporation is they're not able to answer some of those questions in a financial way because they're missing their accounting for impact, right? So here's the way I see it. If someone is attacked for being woke, and or DEI policies or supplier diversity or hiring more women. And frankly, like I sit in rooms and I'm like, how are we having this conversation? And somebody hasn't flipped the table over, right? So there's activist investors that come out and ask these questions. CEOs back down and they make everything disappear and just neutralize everything, which in the 8 or 10 we've seen in the last couple weeks or a few months, has affected share price. I don't know about long term, but many of them it impacts negatively. This isn't a political question. It's actually a financial question. And what I always say is if you are a company who's attacked by an activist investor and you've been working with us at Lunum, you can actually respond and say, yes, we invested $1 million in trying to get more women in. Because you know what? In the community where we operate, there's a ton of women, there's a ton of opportunity here. So we did that. We spent $1 million trying to bring more women in. We brought more women in, and guess what? Our turnover went down, our productivity increased. We were able to overcome efficiency issues on the plant floor. Our overall equipment effectiveness improved. And we estimate over the last 24 months, it dropped, we'll just say $70 million to the bottom line across all of our operations in the US. If you are the CEO of a company and you can turn and look back at that investor who's an activist or someone questioning it and say, okay, so what other questions do you have about me and my responsibility to my shareholders? And if that is not an acceptable answer, that you used dollars to generate a bigger profit to the bottom line, then like those people are not investors. They are something else. And it's to me, it's kind of sad that people put themselves in the guise of an investor when they're actually something else.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. Like, that's what gives me the urge. Like, well, we have to kind of talk politics there, but because your product is the answer to that. A the example you just laid
100%.
out is wonderful, because when most people hear woke, not awake, but woke, um, originally when I was a teenager, this is a very good term. It's like alert to injustice, alert to how things could be better. Um, but as time went on, kind of, I mean, I'm sure it kind of could have happened either way, but kind of because there is no like, f- you know, benchmark, no, or no like, KPIs, there's no impact that we can
Right.
see. Um, there was these blurred lines, and all of a sudden, this term was hijacked by a radical political element, and yeah, that's the most appropriate way I can say that. But like, it's hijacked, and all of a sudden, you're seeing people under the guise of woke being alert to injustice, calling for and enacting very regressive things. And I mean, I guess the most recent example would be the United Healthcare CEO. It's just something that is absolutely horrible. But I see so much support from people my age for this kid's action, and it boggles my mind. It's very regressive. And it's not the right way to go about things. And um, he actually ended up not even being a United Healthcare um, consumer. He just wasn't even in their network. But
Oh, interesting. Do we know that? I
yeah,
didn't hear that.
yeah, we found that out like a week ago or so. Which is just like, but I mean, and there's other elements of why this kid gets so much support, but it just makes no sense to me. It makes very some sense, a tiny little bit of sense, and the sense it makes is not moral. But I really do think that these type of things can, or like the radical elements that take advantage of the good that you're talking about. We all want human
Yeah.
flourishing. We want everyone in the supply chain to be able to, have wealth and flourish and all these things. And that is the goal. We can disagree on different ways to go about it, or the best ways to go about it. But what we have lacked is that impact data. I think it's a really, really incredible product, and it's something that's going to be able to lead to some enlightenment, truly, because it it's funny. So I do also have a bias. My original degree was in accounting. I got my master's of accounting, my CPA. I never actually worked as an accountant. I went straight into consulting. Now I'm in sales, and I do this, and I love this. But I do have a bias towards like the accounting portion of business is super important. And the first recorded writing ever was an accountant. They were it was a recording on a clay tablet of like wheat counts, and it was signed by an
Really?
account. Yeah, so it was it
It was
Egypt?
the very
I'd
first audit.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. I'd have to look it up again, but it was in a book that I read. I was very into evolution and like both like mental and physical evolution of humans, and um, was in a book called Mankind, the story of us. But yeah, it was the very first recording we ever had. It was signed by an accountant, and that changed the world. Like it truly did change the world. It's like
Yeah.
somebody can record these things. It wasn't a king or anything like that. It was just accounting, and this is something that can change the world. It's a very cool, unique idea. I'm happy to see it being implemented. And it can save the political. Like some of my guests I have on just are political people, like they're journalists or whatever they are,
Yeah.
um, and it can help bring the realms of kind of insanity back to that majority of, hey, we all want that same thing.
Yeah, it's a very I mean, I'll be honest, it was a 4 a.m. moment for me, right? I was literally like just open to whatever the universe was going to give me in terms of what we needed to do next. Like, that sounds like a crazy person. And very early on, there were people that were like, you have departed from reality if you think you can change the world this way. And which probably added more fuel to the fire, but it just makes so much sense to me. And when I look at, I was just looking at some numbers for this year, rounding out of like uh, efficiency and effectiveness of wages paid in packaging and containers. And we see on average like 59% of the efficiency is lost in the wages based on the metrics we measure. And you couple that with like high attrition, high turnover, employee engagement is not great in a lot of organizations. And if I was a plant manager or a COO or a CEO, and I knew anywhere in my organization I was bleeding 59% effectiveness in any area, I would
Hmm.
attack it like mad. And that's exactly what we want people to do. I mean, is it easy? No. But what great change in an organization has ever been you just flip it on? I mean, for all the technology that's out there, no one flips on anything and just gets the change. But we have to start thinking about things differently. And uh, yeah, so I think we are headed into a new era at this point. And uh, I didn't I didn't know where we were headed when I had the idea the first time. I mean, I used to sit like and try to do the math myself, and had no idea where I was going with it. And impact accounting made so much sense. And I'll say, like, I think even in the beginning, I don't think I had even ever heard the term ESG before all of it started. And but to me, it's sometimes I think maybe the beginner's mind or the outsider looking in. But what I did know was I'd seen so much of what happened and spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of people over my career that were on the factory floor, and then turned around and went to the conference room and talked to the business leader. And some organizations are incredible at making the connection, but most I think are still fairly disconnected. And
Hmm.
uh, yeah, and I don't expect we'll have enlightenment before I'm done, but I hope it inspires someone to keep going at least.
I think you may be surprised on the amount of progress you can make in 10 years. Because once you start explaining it, it just does make so much sense to me. It seems like the right way to go about this kind of change that, um, when people are upset with DEI, I get it. At times I'm upset with it too, just the way that we're going about it. But I can't remember who wrote this either, but there's a good article saying DEI isn't working, but it's just our first try. And
Right.
yeah, so I was like, oh, SNE is it was just a great insight of, yeah, we didn't go about this the correct way. But when you look back at it, it's like, yeah, this exactly if I was gonna try this the first time, it's exactly how I would have tried it the first time. And now we need to
Yeah,
adjust.
it's and to your point, so two thoughts come to mind. One is I've sat with people who are like leaders in some of these spaces in sustainability and DEI early on, and I actually had one of them say, "Well, I've been a practitioner for 20 years and you have not." And I looked at this person in a room full of people and I said, "If you have been a practitioner for 20 years, like what has changed then? Tell me." And I think some of it is the beginner's mind. Uh, I do also think so. I do a yin yoga class on Saturdays, which has become my favorite 90 minutes of the week. And it's more, if you've ever done yin yoga, this is more a lecture than it is yoga. And you maybe do
Oh.
5 poses in 90 minutes. And someone who's studied uh, yoga as the science of yoga and meditation for many years is my teacher. And uh, he made a comment Saturday that, right, because part of yin is like removing yourself, you're like removing your mind out of your body
Hmm.
and being able to get your body to places it's never gone in a pose and doing it in like 4 minutes. Uh, when you're like, no, 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 I can't balance on one foot for 12 minutes. And then all of a sudden you can do it. And uh, when you experience what's going on, but you remove the judgment and you remove the chatter, and you just persevere. Uh, but he made a note and he said, nearly every human has to try any kind of movement 100 times before they can actually achieve it. And I think you're right in what you said. This is our first time, right? This is the, and I, whether it's DEI or civil rights or, and I had the I had the like really huge honor of meeting the King family last year during the 60th anniversary of I Have a Dream. And I don't know if I've ever talked this out loud, so and it's a little bit emotional. Uh, and something that was so profound to me was uh, Andrea King, who is married to Martin Luther King III. She said, people always look at us as the family that has to drive the change, or they look at us as the people responsible for civil rights. And she said, civil rights aren't something you put on the mantle and dust off once a year. They are something you have to continually try to live and change and adapt. And I'm not quoting her perfectly, but it is true. I think it's not giving up and it's continuing to learn, and eventually we'll, going back to land the plane here on at our very beginning, is like, this is the wisdom I'm looking for. I'm looking for what happens when you put your heart and soul into solving this in a way that works for everyone. And what I'm looking for is what changed because I decided to step out, or what changed because I decided, and then the second person followed me, and the third person, and the fourth person, and I would say the biggest thing I can give is the offering of this is what we think needs to be done in organizations. And if people want to accept that, we would love to have them on the ride with us. Uh, but I think we have to not get complacent, and more we get complacent and sit in front of a computer and expect ChatGPT to give us the answer. And while that can give us information, I don't think it's can give us the wisdom, right? That's what's missing.
Yeah, no, that is all. It's a beautiful story there. Um, and yeah, no, technology. On that note, technology is not going to be the end all be all on how to solve all of our societal problems. And there's an argument that it can cause more, but again, another conversation. As we're kind of closing in on 45 minutes here, I would love to get some more information about you, your leadership style, company culture, things of that nature. So,
Yeah.
just kind of, yeah. So, on that note, how would you describe your leadership style and how has it evolved since you began your journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say at Lunum, we're a very flat organization in terms of, you know, yes, there are times we have to all take ranks, but I try to encourage everyone to communicate. And I'm probably overly transparent at times, especially being in a startup. I want people to know exactly where we're at. Um, and empathy. That is that was like a light switch in my head. I've always been empathetic, and I remember as I was going through sort of my own. I mean, I'm always learning, right? And I always say like we all screw up, and if you get a B- in life, you did great. I look for people to make mistakes and guide them, and it doesn't make every day perfect. But I really attempt to lead with empathy about the people. Doesn't mean I don't have to make hard decisions sometimes. Uh, and then, I'd say our culture. So we are in even our small team is in 3 countries. And oh, wait, I'm sorry, 4. We're in the US, Canada, Portugal, and South Africa. I forget sometimes. And then even in the US, we're across a few states. So we operate really well as a remote team. I would say my style is like, I always tell employees when they're new, my favorite thing that I would love to hear from you is I call you and you pick up the phone at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday and you go, bugger off, I am taking a nap. Because you're so confident in what you're doing with us and that you know your place and you're getting your job done that I don't have to worry. Like, you can tell me exactly what you're doing. You don't have to like worry, like, did I go to do not disturb or on the red on the teams? So I have an incredible team. I could not do it without them. They are behind me, next to me, in front of me, and I'm super grateful. And then I'd say like our culture, when people start, most of them get what we call the Lunum's 4 agreements and our house rules, which
Oh,
is based on the 4 agreements from Don Miguel Ruiz, the book, which is one of my favorites. And it's be impeccable with your word, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, and do your best every day, knowing it'll vary. Um, we work around like the house rules are really around like the idea of uh, knowing that we're on earth here, I think, to create relationships. There is an asterisk that you will still have to use the CRM to manage some of that information. uh, and I'm very transparent to people, like, this is at the stage we're at. We don't go out hiring 50 people or even 10 or 2 people for a single role. We bring people in who we can Swiss Army knife, and it's not always the easiest environment. It's tough. And I also am a firm believer in emotion and that it's a positive thing as long as it remains on the side of rational. Uh, and crying and getting upset and, like, sometimes wanting to throw things across the room. Those are days, like, to me, those are the feelings of change and growth. So I don't discourage emotion. And yeah, I mean, I'm still learning. I mean, I think we all have a ton to learn, like in the leadership side. And I just want to keep growing there and hope that people want to continue to come to work every day. So far, that's been pretty close to the case. So I'll take it.
yeah, no, I mean, I can, again, through, I mean, our second conversation here, but through no more than 2 hours of talking with you, I feel inspired talking with you. And like, yeah, you're someone I'd want to work with and work behind and, go after this change with. And I've been able to see over the course of an hour here of like, oh, I can see how this can lead to, and like how this can lead to wisdom, like what you're working on. Um, Once you start talking about it, very, very much makes sense. So I think all of these values that you're implementing, with the 4 agreements, your leadership style, all of it, um, is leading you down the right path here. And on that note, are there any books? You actually have one recommendation I am currently reading, but any books, leaders, teachers, anyone that has inspired you on the
Yeah.
journey?
Oh gosh, the list is long. So right now, uh, you and I talked about Sir Ron Cohen. His first book, called The Second Bounce of the Ball,
Got it
You
right
got
here,
it. Oh,
actually. I
you
got
got
it
the
right here.
hard copy. Okay. I'm jealous. So that one I think is probably the best startup strategy book I've ever read. I I've spent a lot of time recently reading. It's Bruno Olierhoek. It's called Holistic Impact. Is a great book. He was a leader, global leader for Nestle, and now is developed his own framework for uh, regenerative and sustainable business. Paul Pullman, of course, is always at the top of my list with Net Positive. And the book that I was thinking, Four Agreements, obviously, everyone should read it once a year. It should be required reading. And Leading with Empathy by Peter Bregman. That was a transformative book for me. Really, I read it a few weeks before I took a pivot, and it really helped me be comfortable being called to something that wasn't going to be perfect and was outside of the box. But uh, yeah, someday we started putting books in our newsletter, and then yeah, I'm a few months behind right now, but yeah,
No, it's
that's my
all
book
great.
list for 25.
No, it's all great. It's all great. I'm not too deep. I'm only a few chapters into the second bounce of the ball by Ronald Cohen, but I'm really enjoying it. And I'm someone who one of my main readings are like entrepreneurship readings. That and then just like different historical topics. Evolution really gets to me sometimes. I get these
Yeah,
evolutionary kicks, but no, it's been incredible, and yeah, I'll definitely note each one of those to go back to and read them, and
yeah.
I'll reread the Four Agreements.
Yeah, let's talk again in the new year and see what you thought. I think that book should have uh another revision, and I yeah, and I shouldn't discount Sir Ron Cohen's most recent book, which is Impact, and I think that is fantastic, and he's been a massive supporter throughout the journey of impact accounting. So uh yeah, we're really excited to be part of the work he's doing.
Very cool. And then a couple more questions here for you, and I can let you out of here because I know that we're over time at
Yeah.
this point. What are some of the most critical skills you believe an entrepreneur needs to succeed, and what's some advice you would give to somebody that's wanting to start their own company?
Oh, okay. So I think first is the ability to just keep going, right? And whether you call it perseverance or insanity, but to continue to believe in what you see. And I more and more look around at, everything around us was at one point a thought, and now it is a thing. Uh, so I think if you actually believe, you can you can manifest anything you want. I also think it's be kind to yourself and to the people around you, uh, and be willing to fail way more often than you succeed. Uh, and I've gotten into the habit of my mantra is now I surrender myself. That's like my everyday mantra. Like I surrender myself to the business. Uh, and the advice I'd give, and I think you'll find it in Second Bounce of the Ball, is you have to be willing, at least from my perspective of entrepreneurship and building a scalable organization, maybe not a main street business, but you have to be willing to give all of yourself to it. Uh, and there are a lot of sacrifices along the way, and there are a lot of hard days. Uh, I think the further you can start from your aha moment, like the further and faster you start building that aha moment and you commit to it and move with it, I think is better. Uh, yeah, I think everybody's journey is so different. This is one of the things that
Hmm.
uh, really is hard to give anyone advice, but I'm always spouting advice. I think you just have to be willing to. I mean, there are days when I'm a mess and like we fail miserably a lot of days at what we try, but we just keep going and tease it out. So I think if you do feel called to something, you feel really fulfilled when you go out and you try and slug it out. I often say to people, even if for some reason, you know, 2 years or 5 years from now or whatever it is, we fail, I will 100% feel like we succeeded every time.
That's a beautiful message. And on that note, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so much
you.
for coming on. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm very excited for us to get it up and to be able to review it again myself, even. And I'm looking forward to talking with you once I finish the book and seeing where Lunum and everything goes.
Yeah, for sure. I will see you, and we will. Next time, we'll have to have lunch or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate your time again. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the next time we're able to talk.
Thanks, Troy. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.